My name is Faldor, and it is known that I am the last and only heir of the cursed King Calvadoth, who was the scourge of all free people in the times of old. By the fortune of the moon, I was freed from the corruption of my father, and found a new home amongst the priests here, far from the country of my father, known only now as the Land of Stones. I have risen in rank, and now in my 40th year, I am beholden to become the next High Cleric of my church. One of my primary duties is the teaching of young adepts, who have been sent to us, some only as students to learn the ways of reading and inscription, and others as apprentices in preparation to enter one of the three orders of our faith. One of my lectures to the young monks in the hall of study was giving account of the history of the fairy. I was speaking of the elven laws against the entrance of humans into their lands to the east when I was interrupted. "But aren't the Harmoni allowed passage through fairylands?" one of my students had asked. "Yes, indeed they are," I answered succinctly. "But why?" the curious and intelligent girl continued. I thought for a moment, as I knew this tale well, having studied it, and in truth been a part of it in some degree. "I caution you that it is a dark tale, and may well haunt your dreams with its shadows. All of you would have to be in agreement for me to interrupt your scheduled study to relate it." The children had spoken quietly amongst each other for a few moments before nodding their consent. "Very well then, but I caution you that of all the tales of old, this one is perhaps one of the darkest. I will describe the state of the Black Scorpion King's empire before its final ruin, as he lusted for the blood of the elves in order to attain its power of longer life. Their eyes were keen, bright, and hungry for such a tale. And so I began. "First you must know that the Harmoni were not always as they are now." We know the Harmoni now only as the separate small bands of wandering tribes which crossed the civilized nations in related groups of entertainers and jonglers. However, not so long ago they were united together in a great nomadic horde, which moved only seasonally from the lands of the north in summer to the lands of the south in winter. At that time, it was their custom to honor a single leader descended from the ranks of their four great families to serve as a king for a period of 10 years. This king was brought into power not by battle or election, but through a contest of wit and skill known as the Kansani, or Song War. The winner of the Kansani would thereby be titled the Bard King for the duration of a decade. As you may well imagine, the Bard King was not a ruler of power or political control, but the most skilled and charismatic performer amongst all the candidates. The actual leaders of the Harmoni are the eldest females of each of the four families. These ancient, and some would say unnaturally long-lived women, simply use the Bard King as a mouthpiece for their decisions. The latest and last of these great kings was the third of 7 brothers born to the family of Reimnach. His name was Nathindrin, and he was only in the 4th year of his position when the events which I am describing began. You must imagine the vast moving city that was the traveling horde of the Harmoni. Tens of thousands of Harmoni made their way in a continuous migration of tents, wagons, and beasts of all manner through the wild lands. The Harmoni drew in people of all races to witness the great spectacle of their presence. The songs, tales, and magic of the Harmoni were looked forward to with anticipation as the year's greatest event. It could be said that the horde had conquered without the benefit of sword or bow, and they were allowed free passage through all the territories of this land. However, it was a dark time in the lands of the wretched King Calvadoth. He had united the tribes of human territories and launched a non-stop war against the Western Fairy in lust for the mystical properties of the elven blood. his lands had become a ruined and nightmarish place where the common people were captive slaves to the obsessions of their leader and his army. The Harmony horde had passed within miles of Calvadath's empire and found their traditional road destroyed and broken by some great magic which had left a seemingly bottomless crag with the Bridge of 30, so named because 30 could pass from shoulder to shoulder, was obliterated. The horde took to another route, which brought them into the black, cursed forest of Calvadath's realm, and there camped as they contemplated the course of their journey. They raised their tents and built their fires upon a high hill, and the ancient mothers gathered to discuss their plans. It was agreed that a group of warriors would be sent to the castle called Faldor to ask permission for the horde to continue a tangent route through the lands. Of the 20 that was sent, 5 returned with a nightmarish account of what lay within the twisted and shadowed realm beyond. Calvadath's kingdom had become a wretched and tormented hell of disease, poverty, and warfare. The peasants huddled in terror beneath the gigantic and ominous stone monoliths which covered the land, hiding not only from the twisted horrors that stalked in the shadows, but from the king and his men as well. It was said that the monarch had taken to cannibalism, and his own people were but cattle to stock his larder. The Harmony warriors reported that they were turned away and then attacked at the castle walls, and of 20 which had sent off, 15 were slain in the forest by night. Their foes were nothing less than walking corpses who were wandering the forests in droves like starving wolves. These ghouls had taken to haunting the mass graves of plague pits and feasting on the flesh of the fallen like rats at a refuse heap. It had been told to the warriors by the peasants that these were the slain soldiers of Calvadath who had drank the blood of the fairy and were now condemned to walk the earth as monsters upon being slain in battle. These creatures had fallen upon the Harmony from the forest in what seemed an endless shambling army of wicked clawed hands and rotted dead flesh. "We shall draw them to the east and cross through the mountains," the eldest of the 4 had proclaimed, and the decision was called wisdom by the others. "But what of these people?" Nathindran had said, standing over the fire of the council tent. "This is a great blight of evil which has fallen over these lands." "A blight of their own doing," the ancient replied, fixing Nathindran with pallid, near-blind eyes. "This evil is one which will run itself to ruin in due course. It is not for our people to meddle in the troubles of such wicked and lost persons." "What would you have us do?" Nathindran's grandmother said as she gazed into the crystal spheres of seeing used as a device of divination by the Harmony. "Shall we go to war with these heathens? They are worse than animals, feeding on their own and drinking the blood of the great elves." It was forbidden of the Harmony to even quarrel with the fairy people, and the thought of Calvadath's crime had sickened them all to their core. "Let me take a group of men, and we shall ride to the castle and confront this monster." Nathindran burned with righteous fury. His black eyes were fiery with rage. "You shall take none of our people into that pit of folly," the eldest scowled, as if speaking to a naive child. "We will have no more of our people made fodder for these creatures." "Then I will go alone," he answered, as he stared into the fire and let his long cloak of deep crimson, the badge of his station, fall to the earth. "You are a fool, brash youth," his grandmother chastened with a quivering, shaking fist, although Nathindran by then had already seen his 40th summer. He smiled and bowed to them as if to apologize, despite his disgust at their judgment. "Aye, a fool I am, but I would sooner go to Orissa upholding order as a brave fool than a cowardly king." And with that, he left the tent, calling for his swords. No other soul amongst them would dare go against the decree of the 4, but it was before he left upon his black horse called Addison's that his grandmother brought him a gift. "You are a quick-witted idiot, but I will not send you to your death with naught but a bow and knife to teach she handed him the crystal sphere which she held always in her grasp. "Take this stone, and with it some use of my power. You are well versed in the ways of illusion and simple trickery, but with this you may command true magic, borrowed from the fallen star from whence this stone was hewn. It cannot be taken from you, for if it is, it may return at your beck." Nathindran nodded his thanks, but found the woman's eyes cold with bitter loss. It seemed that to her he had already fallen. And so it was that Nathindran the Bard King left behind his people in a flood of tears and sorrow as he rode into the shadows of the forest in a cool autumn morning. The path was narrow and muddy as Idina sang, trowed with careful hoofs across the leaves and branches of the woods. The sky was a bleak gray like night, and rain fell in a constant, never-ending drizzle through the swaying branches of Calvadav's kingdom. In an hour, he arrived at the first village built nearby a towering ring of stones where the people would not look upon him, and he felt like a ghost amongst the living. A mile from this collection of thatch hovels, he saw the plague pit of which had been spoken. At first it appeared as if the pit were like any other, filled with dozens upon dozens of those lost to the plague. But upon more careful examination, he saw that many of the pale decomposing forms moved slowly as they fed, writhing like maggots amidst the disease and vermin. The creatures, upon smelling warm living blood, descended upon him. As if by a sudden burst of instinct, Nathindran withdrew the crystal sphere and held it high in his hand. The wretched and diseased creatures, clothed in the garb of soldiers, fell back to their horrid feeding, ground in agony of the dim rose-colored radiance which glowed from within it. Staring in wonder at what he had seen, Nathindran continued onward into the dense and tainted forest as the road began to ascend up a great hill where he caught his first glimpse of Calvadav's mighty fortress. The keep was one like that built by the deep folk of the north. Its wall stood to the tops of the blackwood trees which reached up around it as if they themselves were in torment. Its many towers and turrets stood crumbling and cracked as lichen and vines devoured the stone with the unrelenting war of time on man's creation. The air stank of mold and decay and was filled with the empty hollow song of the lost spirits which roamed every corner of this ruined domain. Nowhere did Nathindran spy any sign of mortal life. He dismounted and stood before the drawbridge, clothed only in the blue leggings of a journeyman in a loosely knitted cloak of wolf pelts. In the ancient times, the Harmony had been fierce raiders and barbarians who terrified all with their swift mounted invasions. It had been only with the coming of the first prophet of the goddess Arissa the Discordant when they had laid down their arms for a more peaceful existence. Yet, always they remained wanderers, never content to stay in one place for more than a season. He carried 2 short horsemen's swords at his side, a short bow and a quiver upon his back, and a lute of the finest craftsmanship. The crystal sphere was nestled in a leather bag beside the quiver of his arrows. He tied back his long black hair and, taking a deep breath into his massive chest, called out, "Calvadav!" Already his anger had shown in his refusal to acknowledge the ruler as a king, even reminding himself that he was playing the part of a commoner. He could not resist his own righteous fury. "You call yourself a king but turn away guests from your door? What manner of courtesy is this? Custom dictates you open your doors to a Harmony, so that I might entertain you." This was mockery on the part of Nathindran, but a truth nonetheless. If any Harmony offered a song, it was said that all doors must be opened. Nathindran stood patient and stern as no response was given to his call. "Fine then. I will return to my people, and we shall spread the word that the great general fears to allow a simple minstrel to call at his court." Nathindran made as if he were mounting his horse, and only then did he hear the great machinery of the gate begin to turn, and the bridge begin to fall. As the crossing was made and the portcullis rising, he saw that on the other side, waiting, was a boy of indeterminate years. As he rode forward, he was met, and the boy bowed stiffly, his gaze on the ground as his hands trembled. Please do not name yourself the captain of the king's guard, or I might fall from my saddle. Nathindran jested as he slapped the young man on the shoulder. He saw the boy wince as if he had been crippled by the blow, and Nathindran wondered at the condition of his seemingly fragile mind. No, I am Faldo, the king's son, the pale and malnourished youth said with coal-black frightened eyes. Even worse, I will trade laughter for pity. Never have I seen such a sickly prince. The young man bristled with the jest, but held his tongue. I will take you to my lord father, the youth said, as he shambled across the empty court. At the doors of the great hall, Nathindran left Odysseus with trepidation. He patted his beloved mount on the neck and whispered, "You may flee if trouble should befall me, and I will think none the worse of you." The horse gazed back with its large brown eyes, and Nathindran felt a wave of concern from the animal. He smiled, and then at Odysseus, and kissed the animal on its snout. The Harmony treasured their mounts as kindred beings, as their old religion had taught that a Harmony may be reborn as a horse as a reward for a life well lived. He entered the court behind the boy and was led into the throne room of Calvadas. Calvadas sat a distraught and foul heap of pale flesh streaming over bone. His long hair was mottled and like tree roots over the empty skull-like visage beneath. At his side was a pale and indecent-looking woman with hungry black eyes, dressed like a wanton harlot in a gown of black and red, which hung draped over her like a torn bedsheet. There were 5 men of similar aspect gathered on each of Calvadas' sides, staring at Nathindran like wicked feral dogs with sunken hollow eyes and long bony limbs beneath their black robes. There were soldiers hiding against the walls in the darkness, as if afraid to be seen in the light of the bleak day, which shone through the small windows high at the top of the vaulted ceiling. "This, I must say, Calvadas, is a poor reception," Nathindran said as he gazed up at the ruined figure which presided over the court. "It's a fitting welcome for a wandering vagabond," said Calvadas in a voice so low and ragged that it might have been dying words. "You are correct that I am indeed a wandering vagabond. In fact, I am the king of wandering vagabonds. I am a lord of entertainers and the prince of magicians. Never have I seen a court so overcast with the prospect of viewing my wonders." Nathindran spoke to the court as if he were on a stage preparing to delight an audience, and amused himself with veiled hints as to his true identity. "And what wonders would you share, O king of beggars?" Calvadas growled, drawing dark laughter from the shadows of the chamber. "I never beg. I am more than willing to earn my rewards." "And what will you awe us with, O lord of charlatans? Shall you do some tricks with a set of silver rings, or perhaps play us a song on your toy?" "Perhaps I should entertain you with my marksmanship and put an arrow through your eye," Nathindran thought to himself. "I can do a great many things that might lighten your foul spirit," Nathindran said with a sardonic smile. "But what is fair is only fair. I will make you a bargain, O Calvadas. I will perform a wonder, and if you are not amazed, I will take my leave. If you are amazed, then you will open your dungeon and set every prisoner free." This does sound an amusing proposition, but I shall sweeten that pot with one alteration. Should I not be amused by your antics, then I will kill you and let these men drink your blood. Nathindran stroked his dark beard and smiled at the sickened wretch with a sharp gleam in his eyes. "So be it. It seems a fair wager." It was a testament to the blind arrogance of Calvadas that he still had not gauged the true nature of his visitor. A fool would have seen by the bard's very carriage that he was no mere wanderer, shall your trick be? Calvin said, leaning forward with hungry, wicked interest. I will here before you now meet every soldier in this room in battle, and slay each and every one. This drew angry whispers from some and stark laughter from others, and only Calvadath's queen and her brothers seemed vexed by the visitor's threat. Then let it be done, Calvadath shouted as he clapped his hands. Men, teach this arrogant fool some courtesy. Calvadath would not reveal that the men who stood in the chamber were the only soldiers of his army present for many leagues, as the rest were fighting in both of the far west for the treasured blood wine of the Elves, and defending the northern borders from attacks by the deep folk of the north. Nathindrin watched as some 20 soldiers stalked from the shadows like desperate vermin approaching some injured prey. They drew their swords and moved slowly into a circle around the stranger, with a caution which revealed that even in their great number, they were still hesitant to begin their assault. Nathindrin only smiled as he removed the two short, sickle-like swords from their scabbards and began whirling them in a dizzying display of speed and prowess. I would feel guilty if I were not to warn you all to forfeit now before I slay you, and leave you to become like the corrupt things which I saw at the plague pit. This stopped the soldiers in their place as his words bit at them like daggers. No? Well then, I will apologize now while you still have life in you to hear my words. I will try to be swift, so you need not suffer too greatly, even though I admit I am tempted to let your ends be as slow and as dreadful as those which you have inflicted upon the innocent of this world. These barbed words stung the men of Calvadath's court into fury, and they fell upon Nathindrin in a swarm of shouts and falling blades. First, they fell into confusion, as their swords swung at Nathindrin but met only empty air. As they watched, the illusion he had conjured mocked them and danced through their aimless melee with ridiculous merriment. After a few moments, they stood still and looked at each other with questioning eyes from beneath the visors of their helms. It was then the second pass of the Bod King's magic fell, and before their very eyes, they watched as the forms of their fellows were changed into the clawed, shambling horrors which wandered the wilderness outside. Each soldier saw his comrades as attacking, starving ghouls, and they soon were striking at each other in a panicked, frightened combat. Calvadath's queen shouted for them to bring order, but the king was stricken with idiocy at the sight of his own men fighting each other in his great hall. The third phase of Nathindrin's magic appeared, as wounds began to manifest amongst the soldiers from invisible, unseen blades. Soldiers were decapitated and eviscerated before the eyes of Calvadath, his queen, and her brothers. Even as they were skewered on invisible swords, the warriors continued to fight the phantasms Nathindrin had cast into their minds, and in the brief moments which followed, all lay dead on the floor of the throne room. Calvadath reached for his sword and stood from his throne as he gazed around the now silent chamber, even now unable to resist staring at the scarlet pools of his men's spilled lifeblood on the throne room floor with wretched, disturbing hunger. Then, as the five brothers prepared their foul sorceries, the strings of an unseen lute could be heard strumming in the silence of the court. As Calvadath's rage boiled, he heard the delicate notes echoing from what seemed every corner of his chamber. "Show yourself, you fool!" Calvadath shouted, as he dismissed his wife's plea to retreat. The five sorcerers were chanting as a black mist spiraled from the floor and around their feet. Still, Nathindrin played, and just as the sorcerers had prepared to call up some horror from the blackness of their amassed energies, arrows flew from the shadows and felled them all, one after the other. Calvadath's concubine screamed in terror as the feathered shafts stuck from her brothers' throats, and their chants became mumbled coughs of blood from their dying lips. Perhaps a chant of protection may have been more useful, Nathindran laughed as the sorcerers gasped and clawed at the missiles which struck their necks. It was only then that Calvadath saw the true danger in which he was placed. An assassin has come to your court disguised as a fool, the woman yelled as she pulled at Calvadath's arm. The two fell back, but Calvadath's pride would not allow him to flee until an arrow found its mark in his shoulder, but a hand's length from his heart. Then, cursing the stranger who had come bearing ruin, he was at last fleeing into a passage behind his throne. He and his foul bride ran up a narrow and hidden stair to the top of a tower where they sealed themselves in fear for their sickening lives. Now alone, Nathindran began a search of the castle and beheld the dim history of atrocities which had been committed behind its rotted stone walls. He found dark chambers where the decayed bodies of peasants were chained to the walls, having been violated, torn, and eaten. Long hallways were strewn with the bones of the innocent, where they had been cast away like useless trash to be gnawed on by rats and worms. Everywhere he walked in the forsaken fortress, he detected the presence of a massive, strangely huge spider with pale flesh-like bodies the size of a man's open hand. They covered every tapestry and chair with their thick gray webs. Every room was rank with the stench of death and defilement, and yet nothing could compare to the horror of the banquet hall. Here was a king's great table fit to seat an army, and placed upon it, before every chair, were silver drinking bowls. Above, hanging suspended upside down from the black iron chains, were the pallid, bloodless bodies which Nathindran recognized by their small size and delicate, elongated limbs to be elves. They hung limp and lifeless upside down with severed throats and wrists, their veins torn wide to fill the chalices which lay collecting their life's blood beneath. Their huge, empty eyes stared off into the darkness of death. Calvadath had foregone his humanity and become the most lost and evil of things. At last Nathindran came to the gates of Faldor's endless dungeons, and it was here that he heard cries and moans below. There were still those still breathing in the dark reaches of this catacomb. Withdrawing the shining globe from its purse, he used its light to guide him down the long stair and into the bottomless pit of cages below. Suddenly came a shuffling from above, and he was met by a shining black scorpion the size of a child, which crawled upon the ceiling of the tunnel with the blue, watching eyes of a man. Nathindran drew his sword, but stood horrified and fascinated as it scurried at the edges of the light. "Do you see it?" he heard a voice say from the steps behind him. He looked back to see the pale prince cowering in the darkness. "I see it well, boy. What in the name of Orissa is it?" "It is my brother," the boy whispered in the shadows. "My mother queen has birthed many such as him from her couplings with my uncles." Nathindran felt a sickness and sorrow like none he had ever imagined at the thought of such a mating. But how is such a horror possible? "They are from the dark mountain where such things are commonplace," the boy said, drawing closer. "She and they are not wholly human, but born of something else much fouler in the depths of the demon caves. She spoke of it to none but me. Even my Lord Father has no knowledge of the pacts and prophecies made in the belly of that unholy place. It was their plan to rid the world of any who would stand against them was forged, and then their kind might walk the world uncontested by men or the fairy." Nathindran looked from the boy and back to the monstrosity, which still watched from the stone ceiling above him. Holding up the glowing stone, he cast out a fire from the sphere, which scorched the crawling wall until it fell dying and screaming like a man into the darkness below. "And what of you? What allegiance do you hold?" Nathindran said as the boy sulked at the edge of the shadows. My life has been a chronicle of nightmares, and I long more than anything to leave this place and see what it is to be truly human. I've been told that I have an uncle who lives among the moon priests. I have come here to you so that I might beg for your mercy. Please, take me from this place, and let me know what it is to walk in the light of the sun. Nathindran looked into the eyes of the youth and saw their sadness and longing that he felt was wholly true. It is said that the Harmony can read men's souls by their eyes, and so it was he judged the boy a captive of powers beyond his control and decided to free him. So be it. You may follow me from this hell, and I will set you on a brighter path. First, you will help me to free those that lie waiting in this cauldron of shadows. The boy agreed, and they continued their descent into the dark below the fortress. Calvadath had built his fortress atop a great labyrinth of caves, and made there a Leviathan prison, in which to hold hundreds of victims his soldiers marched back to the keep after every battle. Nathindran stood at the bottom of the steps and looked out into the massive cathedral of cells which honeycombed the hewn grey walls, and saw that Calvadath had wrought a purgatory of cold stone cages into what seemed miles of rock. My queen mother says that in no other place in the castle does she feel at home, more than here. So does it remind her of the dark mountain, the boy said as he crept up to Nathindran's side. Then what a place that mountain must be, he whispered back as he walked sword in hand through the corridor of black rooms. He felt that if he trod within the very heart of despair, as the light gave view to the horrible gallery of bones and remains which sat discarded in piles in every corner. How could no one stop this? He said, turning to the youth. You have arrived at the very end of my Lord Father's reign, he replied, shaking with fear and cold. Nathindran. All men fell under his sway, into the qualities of the blood wine. Now his army lays fallen and defeated at the border of the Elven kingdoms. Down here, hidden in one of these chambers, was his last hope of victory. The Faerie have called upon the aid of their Disselven kindred, and with their magic, they have laid his army to ruin. Months ago, the group of soldiers you slayed brought back a captive from the Valley of the Twilight Host. They kidnapped from the city of Arathon a daughter of their king named Insilva, and it is she who is the last living fairy here, as all others have been used up by my Lord Father's thirst. He has grown mad with the longing for the blood wine, and I fear that even his hostage would have been sacrificed soon. He had taken to coming here in the night and drinking from wounds too slight to be fatal. The rest of the cages hold people from the neighboring lands, as the madness of the wine will drive its users to drink the blood of any, should that of the fairy prove unattainable. Now Nathindran could see the pale naked bodies of people trembling in the dark of their prison, curled on soil strewn like beasts. This madness ends now, he said with fury, as he once more raised the sphere high, and the walls of the cavern began to shudder and crack. The doors of the cell shook and were wrenched forth by the power of the Harmony magic through the vessel of the crystal sphere. And the prisoners stumbled forward into the light, weeping, and threw themselves at Nathindran's feet with gratitude and prayers of thanks. Go now, leave this place, he shouted, and they obeyed with joy as they ran, carrying those too sickened and starved to walk themselves. The boy pulled at Nathindran's sleeve and took him to a cage by itself, where only in the light of the sphere he now saw the hunched and bloody form of a pale fairy girl chained to the wall by her wrists. Nathindran was immediately taken by the awesome dark beauty he saw now ravaged and tortured before him. He ran to her and spoke strange words by which the chains crumbled into dust as he swept off his cloak of wolf pelts and covered her frail nakedness. Her skin and hair were as black as endless night, and the eyes eyes which gazed upon him were clear and blue, like a frozen lake in the brightness of a winter morning. At first afraid, she crawled away, but he held out his hand and said, "Look into the light, and be healed by Arissa, daughter of the fairy." Then, as she looked into the glow of the gashes and the cuts which marred her began to close and fade in the power of the harmony magic. Still, she said nothing, but instead fell into a heavy slumber. Nathaniel gathered her small form into his arms like a babe and carried her from the limbo blackness of Calvadav's prison. As they stepped into the gray light of the keep above, they heard cries and yells of fury through smoke which drifted over the halls of Calvadav's court. The released prisoners had set fire to the table of the banquet hall and lit the tapestries aflame as they broke and destroyed everything which crossed their path. They passed through the chaos with a sense of justice as the hissing screams of the flesh-colored spiders could be heard over the crackle of flames. Nathaniel found Odyssenai waiting in the courtyard, and the mount stomped its hooves with impatience at the sight of its rider. "You are right, Odyssenai," Nathaniel said, responding to the horse's insistent stomping as if it were speaking. He held the sleeping dark fairy easily in one arm as he mounted and carried her tenderly in his arms. "We have best to be on our way." He pulled himself up and, true to his word, extended a hand to the youth, who smiling took it and rode behind him to the castle gates. "But what of Lord Father and Queen Mother?" the boy said quietly with fear in his every word. "I will leave their fate to the people of this land," he answered as he pointed to a great mob of peasants who were storming up the road with lit torches and every implement that could be made a weapon. Many of the prisoners had made their way back to the villages and had told of Calvadav's insanity. Now knowing that his soldiers were vanquished, they came calling for blood and fire.